In this video series, I'm going to show you how I apply 4 key design principles that you should be using in every single communication that you create. In this video, we'll be covering
contrast. So if you haven't watched my previous video on the 4 key design principles, go do that now. But if you have, you'll remember that contrast is really important for creating emphasis and impact, and in particular, it helps organize information and guide the reader through your communication. So let's have a look at how I apply contrast.
So we're going to continue on with the resume example that I've used in the previous 2 videos. So if you've seen them, you'll know that we started with an original version. We've since applied alignment and then proximity. So what I want to do now is take the version from the previous video on proximity and create contrast. So the thing with contrast is you want to make it stand out and you want to make it look like the contrast is there on purpose and it's not a mistake. But how much contrast you apply will also depend on what you're creating. So this is a resume. It's going to be a bit more subdued than, say, an advertisement or an invitation or some other communication where you'll be able to apply a lot more contrast. And the other thing with contrast is it's really good at creating a hierarchy. So what do you want people to look at first, second, third, etc.? And so what I'm going to start with is the name. We do want the name to stand out quite a bit. And then secondary to that, probably the different sections. So let's start with the name. So there's several ways that we can apply contrast. We could use it by size, location, color, typography. So I'm going to do a couple of things. And the first one I'm going to do is change the font. Now, one thing I would recommend when combining fonts is to stick to a maximum of 2. So that's already making it stand out a lot. And one thing I should mention at the moment, because we've got a lot of bold down here, that's sort of competing. So what we want to do is make sure that this really stands out. So I'm also going to increase the size a bit as well. So one thing I am going to do to make it stand out even more is apply a color. Now this is something that you probably wouldn't do to a resume, but I think it is acceptable if you apply a little bit of color. So the next thing I want to talk about is the contact details. So they're actually the same point size as the body text. Now contact details are important, but I don't really want them to stand out. What I want people to do is look at the name and then start looking at the details around what they've actually done. If they then want to contact this person, it's pretty obvious where they need to look for those contact details, but we don't want them to stand out. So I'm just going to reduce the point size of the number and the email address. So the next thing I want to talk about is the headers, because they don't seem to stand out. So if we make them stand out, those sections are going to be much more clearly and easily identifiable. So what I want to do is change the font for these as well. As I said before, you don't want to use too many fonts. So what I'm doing is using the same font as I've used for the name. So now they stand out a lot more compared to the body text, and it's starting to become clearer that these are individual sections. So there's a couple more things that I want to change, and that is the years, because at the moment it just looks the same. So one thing I would highly recommend, if you are able to choose your type or font, sometimes you're not able to, but if you are, a really good idea is to choose a font that has a lot of different options. Because what that will mean is you can highlight information using the same font, but by making it either bolder, thinner, or italic. And what that does is it ensures that the font all looks the same because it's coming from the same type family. but at the same time, it's different enough to highlight information. So all I'm going to do is change this to the light version of this type. So I mentioned at the start that this really stands out. So I still want this to stand out in comparison to the text below, but I'm going to just make it a bit more subtle. So I'm going to do the same thing and make it light. And I'm also going to reduce the point size down to make it the same as the body text. So now if I zoom out, so if we compare the two, it's starting to look way more clearer, and it's starting to become a lot more obvious where the sections start and end, which is something you really want when people read through your communication, because it'll make it easier for them to find information. So if you've enjoyed this video and want to be updated on new ones that I release, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And if you have any questions at all about what I've shown in this video, or any questions at all on design, make sure you let me know in the comment section.